There was a serious crime, not as serious as 9/11, 1973, but still very serious. So what do you do when there's a crime? Well, you try to identify the perpetrators, capture them. If it's an international issue, use international forces, no problem in this case, and bring them to trial and have a fair trial. Well, they couldn't do that. They didn't try to do that, and there's a good reason, which was explained later on. 8 months after 9/11, the head of the FBI, Robert Mueller, had interviews with the Washington Post in which he told them that we really don't know who was responsible. He says, we believe that the plot was hatched in Afghanistan but implemented in the United Arab Emirates and Germany. Well, if they only could believe it in April, they didn't know it the preceding October, which is why they did not respond. Presumably that's the reason why they didn't respond to the Taliban when they, who had made tentative offers to extradite Osama bin Laden, but wanted to see some evidence. That's what you do when you ask for extradition. And of course this was contemptuously rejected. So we went ahead and bombed. That's a major war crime. First of all, there was no international authorization of any kind, totally violated international law, but it was a moral war crime in a deeper sense. You have to go back to that time. At that time there were an estimated 5 million Afghans right at the edge of starvation, and it was predicted, the aid agencies, which all had to flee, warned repeatedly and loudly that if the U.S. bombed, it would put at risk another 2.5 million people. Well, fortunately the worst didn't happen, but that's not the way you estimate the moral character of an action. You estimate it on the basis of likely consequences. So they were willing to take a risk of killing another 2.5 million Afghans in order to achieve their ends. Well, what were the ends? Not to end terror, plainly. Actually, I think the ends were pretty well described by some of the leading anti-Taliban Afghans, including the U.S. favorite, Abdul Haq, who was later killed. They strongly, strenuously objected to the bombing. They said the bombing is just killing innocent civilians. It's undermining our efforts to overthrow the Taliban from within, which they thought pretty reasonably could succeed. And you're only doing it because you want to show your muscle and intimidate the world. And of course, Afghanistan has, unfortunately for Afghans, a strategic location right on the periphery of the major oil-producing regions in the Middle East and Central Asia and, of course, South Asia. That goes way back in history, and they've suffered for it. So we don't have documents yet, internal documents. Maybe we'll get them someday. But it looks as if those were the reasons. Right after the bombing was announced, but before it started, there was an international Gallup poll all over the world which asked people whether they were in favor of bombing. Now the question was asked on the assumption that it would be selective. It would go after the perpetrators and those civilians would be attacked, which of course never happened. And on that assumption, there was very little support. Only 2 countries had even majority support. One was India, the other was Israel. But India and Israel, I don't think were even thinking about Afghanistan. India was thinking about Kashmir, and Israel was thinking about the Palestinians. So yeah, you want to go bomb people, great. Let's bomb Pakistan, bomb But even in Europe, the numbers were like in the 20 to 30 percentile. But most interesting were the Latin American answers. Latin America had a little bit of experience with U.S. intervention. In Latin America, the figures range from 2% in Mexico, that is the half of Mexico that we didn't conquer. 2% support there. It went up to, I think, 11% in Colombia. And even in Panama, which is practically a U.S. colony, it was like 16% or something. Well, that was the popular support for the bombing on the assumption that it wouldn't hit civilians, which of course it did. The media cooperated by not reporting it. An international Gallup poll on an issue like that is kind of important, so therefore it's better suppressed. Afghanistan was not invaded and attacked to overthrow the Taliban. That came a couple of weeks later. It was attacked because George Bush demanded that the Taliban hand over Osama bin Laden and associates to the United States. The Taliban vacillated. They indicated they might consider it if there was evidence provided. But the United States refused to provide evidence.
So you wouldn't accept that what happened and continues to happen in Afghanistan with the American and NATO presence is in any sense just? A just war, a just conflict?
I think it's a very weak argument. Basically not. In fact, if you want to know the truth, I think it's one of the most immoral acts in modern history.
One of the most immoral.
And let me explain why. If you look back at October 2001, the United States invaded Afghanistan because the Taliban refused to hand over suspects without evidence. Okay, but actually they had a right to do that. You're supposed to provide evidence if you want extradition.